When Henry was 4 years old, he had already known the various structures of the human body. It was compulsory education for the Joseph family. A closed energy center? He looked at the core of the human body that any ordinary person would have. But his was completely sealed off. Henry had all kinds of guesses about his own condition. He knew that some of his friends of the same age had already mastered every karate belt, but he could not. Even after all his family had done for him, even after he had trained so hard when no one was around, he couldn't believe the truth could be this cruel. He was unable to cultivate martial arts. Henry let out a bitter laugh. He had completely forgotten the various ways his father had told him to comprehend zeal. All he knew is that he wanted to leave the Rice Pavilion as soon as possible. He slowly came back to reality as he drifted aimlessly. He saw that the other acupoints in his body were also closed. Henry felt completely numb. But just then, a faintly discernible airflow suddenly seeped into his body from somewhere. It followed along his veins and slowly drifted towards his energy center. It brought him back into focus for a moment. This is the cultivation technique of heaven and earth that Father mentioned. That can help people find their zeal, right? No wonder. If I use this, it might help me find my energy center and unlock it. With this, it will be easy to find my zeal, but it might not last long. Henry then started observing the cultivation techniques of heaven and earth that were floating towards his energy center. A glimmer of hope appeared in his hopeless eyes once again. However, perhaps the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. After the strands of heaven and earth reached the closed outer wall of his energy center, they slowly rotated 2 times but were unable to enter. They eventually seemed to give up and begin to slowly disperse. Henry sighed. In the end, even this doesn't work. Just as the cultivation technique of heaven and earth was about to spill out of his body, Henry's body suddenly trembled. All the cells in his body were like wolves that had noticed delicious food. They had actually begun to gulp down the cultivation technique of heaven and earth. Outside the secret chamber where Henry was, the strange glowing patterns on the wall had been slowly dimming. But just then, they lit up again. As soon as they had noticed there was something different happening. In Henry's secret chamber, something that had never happened before in the history of the Joseph family occurred. The essence of heaven and earth continued to flow into Henry's body, and then was absorbed by all the cells in his body. What's going on? Is this possible? Can my cells really take this in? Henry felt his cells swallowing the essence as if they had been hungry for a long time. He was a little stunned by what he was seeing. As time passed, Henry felt that his muscles, which normally did not grow no matter how much he trained, were slowly splitting and growing bigger. His heartbeat was becoming stronger and stronger. His blood flow began to speed up. Even his bones were becoming denser, becoming stronger. Looking at this impossible scene, Henry started to understand that his body was different from anyone else's. According to the things he had learned, an ordinary person's body was like a straw house. The structure was very fragile, and it couldn't withstand wind and rain. Once it was used for a long time, it could easily collapse. Usually, a martial cultivator's body could be regarded as a wooden house. Their tissue structure was beyond any ordinary person's, making them stronger. Alexander, on the other hand, had gone through almost perfect physical training. In the future, he could get all the karate belts and improve his inner strength. Then he could be compared to a brick house. Ordinary wind and rain would not be able to do anything to him. As for who would be the stronger martial cultivator, Henry did not know yet. But could it be him? After this experience, he couldn't help but feel that his body could be as strong as a steel building. As he continued to look at his body, he continued to notice that there were many differences from anyone else's body. Some parts of his body were extremely complex, and there were strange tissue structures that no one had ever told him about, or that he had never seen before in books. All these abnormalities made Henry feel like his body was not just a steel building, but a steel wall, protecting something. But what exactly was it? The answer was obvious. His brain. In order to verify his thoughts, Henry's body of consciousness quickly rushed towards the most important and mysterious region in the human body, The structure of the human brain was incredibly complex. There were tens of billions of brain cells. The blood vessels in the brain could extend nearly 10 miles. For a long time, it had been called the domain of God, or the forbidden domain. Even with their technology, human beings were still unable to completely crack the mysteries of the brain. But with the discovery of gene fluid, the human body was perfected. The human body was strengthened, and people discovered that their minds had also become faster and more agile. Their imagination, comprehension, logical thinking ability, and other related abilities in the brain were all significantly enhanced. Many authoritative neuroscience, after repeated experiments and verification, finally concluded that the development of the human brain was directly related to the strength of the body structure. The more perfect the gene was, the more solid the body structure and the more capable the brain. Of course, the sturdiness of the body structure did not refer to the strong muscles that a person could obtain through training. Rather, it referred to the biological and gene chain that constituted the essence of the human body, which was the most fundamental part of this evolution. Hundreds of years before, a Buddhist named Mizan had developed something called Dreamland Yoga, which allowed him to explore his dreams. Through the cultivation of the body of consciousness, he could obtain magical abilities. Now, dreaming yoga had long become a very popular cultivation method for the masses. Tutorials were widely available on the internet for people to use. Those who could use their body, the divine, and the secrets of the dream realms could reconstruct the gene chain and achieve an evolution. Their neural field abilities would also increase along with it. The most direct manifestation would be the increase in comprehension and the dexterity of one's thoughts. The highest would be the understanding of the divine that the top human experts currently knew of, and how the mind interacted with reality. What is this? Henry had just arrived at his destination when he was stunned by the scene in front of him. It was an endless space filled with countless stars. Only a small handful of them were actually visible and bright, but he knew that there were many more in the sky. In fact, there were tens of thousands of stars that had lit up. Occasionally, a few would burst out with a halo similar to the solar flares. In some of the blank spaces between the stars, there would occasionally be ribbons that were like auroras floating out, looking so dazzling and mysterious. In this endless space, most of the stars were currently dim and dull. In fact, in the area far away from here, where Henry was temporarily unable to see, it was even darker. They seemed to be waiting for something to light them up one by one. Is this my mind? Or is this the cosmos? But shouldn't I be able to see my brain? Henry could recall the structures of the brain, its wrinkles, the different lobes, the brainstem, and other parts of the human brain that he had studied in his classes. However, he could not make sense of the scene before him. But he did have a feeling that these stars were welcoming him. He could not explain why he felt this way, but he did. Henry pondered for a moment. He determined that this was some other level of consciousness, but he knew that his body was still there. In other words, the current him was separated from his mind to observe and comprehend the internal structure of his body. Understanding the workings of his energy center would allow him to better sense his inner energy and its circulation patterns. Now that he realized this, it felt like he had gone for a walk around his childhood neighborhood. Like he was looking at things that he had always known. No wonder the stars felt so familiar. Even though it felt like going home, he also recognized that it was strange to feel this way since he had never seen any of this before. But nonetheless, he felt he knew it well. Are other people's minds like this? Henry wondered. Looking at the active brain cells around him, he thought of the snail-like blood flowing in his body, the long physiological reactions, and the closed acupoints in his body. Everything was so different. Could it be that my body structure is so different to protect my abnormal brain? Or am I really just looking at the galaxies of the universe? Henry didn't know how close he was to the answer. In fact, the energy contained in this mysterious cosmos in his brain was definitely unlike anything else ever seen. The energy in this cosmos of Henry's mind was comparable to a nuclear reactor, and was much stronger than anyone else's. It was also just a small part of his brain that had been developed this well so far, so he would be even more powerful as he continued to work on it. If Henry could release the energy within his mind, then his abilities would definitely far exceed that of an ancient martial artist of the same level. However, what he didn't have was the ability for him to unlock his power. While it was an incredible sight, his miniature cosmos in Henry's brain was also a heavy burden on him. He knew that this much power needed a strong body in order to contain it. His closed-off acupoints, the locked-up energy center, and the slow functions of his body were the cost of holding it. It was precisely because Henry's body was so strong that this cosmos of a mind could exist. No other body in the history of humanity would have been able to hold it. Moreover, his brain was still growing into the cosmos it could be. It was still in the process of being developed. If the body holding it all could not manage it, a collapse of his body and the death of his brain was what awaited him. Fortunately, he was only 10 years old now, and his body was still developing. It was far from mature, but there was still time for him to get stronger. Henry told himself not to worry about this now. This was his chance to familiarize himself with his body and how it worked. So he needed to explore. Henry's consciousness began to wander around. Slowly, he realized that the stars in his mind were not isolated. They were not motionless either. Instead, they formed groups of huge galaxies. They were circulating and shining according to the laws of heaven and earth that had always existed. But they existed outside of space and time somehow. Henry suddenly remembered that the Lord of the Joseph family had said, when he was teaching Henry martial arts, "The human body's a cosmos, and it is also covered with celestial stars." The evolution of celestial bodies directly affected the circulation of the human body. There are 365 days in a year, and there are 365 acupuncture points in a human body. There is a distinction between black and white in the sky. The sky was divided into 4 seasons, and the human body was divided into the front, back, left, and right. There are all kinds of air currents in the sky, and the human body had blood circulation. People had channels and collaterals connecting them, and were always changing. In the vast universe, in the sea of stars, in the sea of clouds, all things in the universe, life and breathing, everything is constantly changing. It was endless and hard to predict, but there were always rules in everything. The celestial body was invisible, and the human body was tangible. But the human body had condensed the celestial body into its own form. The more he thought about these concepts, the more excited he got. He was immersed in his vast and boundless scene, and he was unable to pull himself away from it. It all felt like a moment, but also like millions of years. Suddenly a darkness came and Henry disappeared from where he stood. Their time had ended, and everyone inside the Rise Pavilion was transported out. As soon as they all left, the square they were standing in was full of bustling noise and excitement. All the children who had come out of the Rise Pavilion were excited to talk to their elders and relatives who came to pick them up. "I finally become a martial cultivator!" causing the birds in the forest to fly up in shock. The others standing there could not help but quiet down as they looked up to see that it was Alexander, though none of them were surprised to see it was him. Many of the observers revealed surprised and envious gazes. Everyone else's children had only found their inner zeal. They would have to practice for 1 or 2 more months before they could truly improve their abilities with karate. However, Alexander had already cultivated his inner energy in the Rise Pavilion in 2 hours and had become a real ancient martial cultivator. This was clear to them because only a martial cultivator would have been able to let out such a loud shout. It indicated that the boy had grasped the use of his inner energy in just 2 hours. Was this the difference between a genius and a mortal? Teresa and Frank quietly stood beside a middle-aged woman. Teresa eventually leaned over and whispered something to the woman after Alexander had shouted. The woman nodded and smiled from time to time. It seemed like Teresa had also learned a great deal in the Rise Pavilion. Frank still had a cool face, but the harsh energy exuding from him had become even stronger. Before Frank entered the Rise Pavilion, his energy had been sheathed like a sword. There, but not threatening. But now, it was as though he could pierce through any obstacle. If an ordinary person had been standing within 10 feet of Frank, they would feel as if their body was being cut by a knife. Obviously, after Frank entered the Rise Pavilion, his soldier aura had increased even more. While the people on the scene were having mixed feelings about all this, they suddenly realized something. These children would be the future leaders of the Joseph family. They all felt a sudden urgency to improve their relationship with different families in case one of these children ever rose and became powerful. The two middle-aged men who had presided over the opening of the Rise Pavilion were also observing every one of the children that had come out of the Rise Pavilion. They noticed a somewhat weak-looking boy with a slightly pale face at the edge of the square. He looked submissive as he whispered something to an old man in front of him. The old man seemed to be excited. He patted the boy's shoulder as if he was encouraging him. The other people had noticed this scene. However, the two middle-aged men had noticed the boy because they could clearly sense inner energy fluctuations coming from him. Could it be another hidden prodigy? Before entering the Rise Pavilion, this boy had been hiding behind the crowd, so they hadn't noticed him. But now the two men remembered who the boy was. They looked at each other and walked towards the boy. When the old man and the boy saw the two men walking towards him, they were at a loss. The child's small hand nervously pulled on the old man's sleeve. The old man seemed to be quite calm as he asked, "Is there anything you need? Don't be nervous. We're just here to see this child." "You were Terry Joseph, right?" the other man asked. "Yes," the boy replied weakly, not even daring to look at the people in front of him. "You have become a martial cultivator too?" The moment the question was asked, the crowd fell silent. They hadn't expected this. "Yes, my grandson has become a martial cultivator." The old man was grinning as though he were the one who had become a martial cultivator. No wonder the old man was excited. They were a branch of the Joseph family that had never produced any decent people, and the resources given to them by their family were getting to be fewer and fewer. They had fallen to the point where they could barely maintain their daily lives by running a few small martial arts studios and shops. The old man was the one with the highest cultivation base in their line, and he had only reached the 9th level of martial cultivator. He was a step away from breaking through to the 10th level, and if they wanted to become a prominent part of the family again, they would need to at least reach the profound rank. The old man had actually given up on his dream a long time ago. It was only when his grandson appeared that his hope was rekindled. After the test, his grandson, Terry, had the best aptitude and constitution in their family for more than 100 years. He had far surpassed anyone in their bloodline. After thinking about it repeatedly and negotiating with his family, the old man had finally made up his mind to bet on Terry. He had used all resources that his family had painstakingly accumulated and the favors that other people owed his family to help build a foundation for Terry. He had also given the 10,000-year-old cold iron essence, which was said to have been found and treasured by his ancestors on a primitive planet, to the Joseph family in exchange for a large amount of contribution points. He then used these contribution points in exchange for a chance for his grandson, Terry, to enter the Rise Pavilion.